If you'll make your way back to your seats, we're going to get started. You've already had a chance to meet 3 of our panelists in our other conversations thus far. So I will reintroduce and just give you their names before I introduce the 4th panelist who you have not had a chance to hear from yet. I will start just and go in order. We have Reverend Dr. Pam Durso, Reverend Dr. Carolyn Gordon, Reverend Alicia Zorzoli, and then finally Reverend Dr. Patricia Hernandez. Dr. Hernandez began her life in the former Yugoslavia, where her parents were missionaries at the time, and returned back to the United States, where she grew up in Detroit, Philadelphia, and the Capital District of New York State. She graduated from the University of Chicago before receiving her Master of Divinity from Colgate-Rochester Divinity School, and then earned a Doctor of Ministry from Central Baptist Theological Seminary, where her dissertation focused on the practices that create access for women seeking to fulfill calls to senior pastoral ministry. She now works as the Associate General Secretary for American Baptist Women in Ministry and Transition Ministries with the ABC USA Office of the General Secretary. I was informed not to use the whole thing. She didn't want me to say all the things, but suffice to say, we are graced to have all of these panelists here to share their experiences with us and to help us reflect further on what it means to be a woman in ministry and what it means to advocate for more women in ministry. I promised to start with a somewhat easy question, which is just to have you reflect for a moment, what has ordination meant for you in your personal story as a Baptist woman in ministry? Anyone is first.
I have been ordained 2 years ago. My whole life, I was a pastor without ordination. I was able to do everything in my country, like, of course, preaching, serving the Lord's Supper, baptizing, performing weddings with my husband signing the documents, leading funerals, everything. So, and I was happy with that. Until, as I told my church, my current church, decided that I needed to be ordained. And first I thought, at my age, I'm ready to go out and play the harp and enjoy. Why do I need to be ordained now? And when they told me they wanted to ordain me, I asked for time to think about that. And I thought, Alicia, you have been speaking all that, you have been teaching all that, you have been preaching all that, you have been writing all that. How are you going to say no? And the other thing is that my church just wanted to affirm my ministry. I had to accept that, and that's what I did. Okay. Somebody else do it.
My mind is such a blur. And thank you for giving voice. It takes sisters. My mic was kind of stuck, and I thought, oh, okay, reach the mic. So you said an easy question. It's actually, for me, it's not really, well, it's both an easy question and a hard question. And it's hard in that I didn't start out seeking ordination in my ministry. And actually, there was a number of people who have said, and on the documentary yesterday as well, that you know, all I wanted to do, and others have said this, was to faithfully serve, to live out the call that had come upon my heart, and wrestling with that was hard enough. I wasn't even thinking, oh, ordination, and I certainly wasn't looking for status. And a kind of intriguing aspect in terms of the whole power dynamic, when I think some of where power is threatened is because for some in our community, ordination and pastoral positions is about power and position. And for many of us, and in general for women, it's about, all I want to do is live out my faith. That's all I wanted to do. It's not about getting that ordination. However, at the point in my journey that it came, it became poignant for me in that it really became about being seen. And what I mean by that is that I was ordained soon after seminary, but in my senior year of seminary, when people were looking for calls, as many of you know, it's generally speaking not absolute, but that to be ordained you have to have a call to a church. And I had been told about the challenges of women getting positions, and I didn't really believe that until I really fully experienced that. And the short story of that was that I had been called by, I met with the search committee, was invited to meet with them. We clicked really, really well. And in fact, skipping the part about being invited to preach at a neutral pulpit, things went so well and so quickly and so smoothly that I was invited to preach right at their church. And then afterwards, the committee met and they unanimously voted to call me. And I'm like, yes, this is not all the horror stories that I've heard from. I was like, oh, that's old stuff. We're beyond that. And then as I was waiting for the call simply to schedule the candidating Sunday, just a formality, really. It was so certain, there was no reason to think otherwise. Then when I got the call and they answered it, and for many of us, we live in our bodies and our intuition, overtakes. As soon as I answered the phone, I could tell that there was something that was off as the chair of the search committee kind of paused and stuttered. And then he said, well, we've decided we're not yet ready to call a woman. And I was just, it may sound really naive, but I was just floored. I'm like, even make something up. Tell me I wasn't a good enough preacher when you brought me up. Or tell me you thought that I just wasn't smart enough, or wasn't caring enough, or wasn't anything enough. But to say overtly outright, you're not ready to call me because I'm a woman. So then, eventually I was called. That's a whole other story. But then, when I went through the ordination process, it was about being seen, not my gender blocking it, but having the church and the community that I had grown up in. I was ordained in my home church. Recognize and value and see the gifts that I had, not the external gender that I was sometimes seen as.
You're looking at me, Carolyn. This is not good. So I was ordained in 2015 after serving in ministry for 30 years. And part of that story is, as a Southern Baptist woman for most of my young life, ordination wasn't even a possibility. That didn't happen with Southern Baptist women. After I finished seminary and after the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship came along, there were possibilities. And I was never in the right time, in the right space for that. And then when I started serving at BWIM in 2009, I decided I didn't want to be ordained because I wanted to stand in solidarity with so many of my sisters who had no possibility for ordination. But then one day, at a leadership team meeting, my leadership team circled me around and they said, now it's time, Pam. It's time for you to be ordained. And they asked my church to ordain. So I was ordained by Baptist Women in Ministry and my church, Cornerstone Church in Snellville, Georgia, in February of 2015. And I have to say, if you wait for the end of your career to be ordained, it's like you get to go to your own funeral. It was so affirming. It was great. All the affirming words, all the care, all the tears. And I was wise enough at that stage to know you need to hire a professional photographer for ordinations because you'll want to remember the day. So I did it. I think waiting was worth it for me.
I think I paused because it's like, ugh. I've been reluctant my whole life, you all. If you know me, I only wanted one thing in life, and that was to fit in. Okay, I know I had really high goals, but my entire life, I never fit in, and not so much that I didn't make sense, but I was the youngest in my family. I was the child that would sit and stare out the window and cry because the bird looked like it was lonely, or just that was me. I wanted to bring home every bird. To be called to preach was part of my struggle in answering the call, was that I wouldn't fit in and they wouldn't like me because I was always conditioned that women didn't preach, and I was okay with that because I didn't want to preach. But I kept having the hidden figures, the mothers. My English teacher, who actually ended up preaching, she would make me do poems in middle school, and I would be sick for weeks before the performance. So all I wanted to do was live at peace with humanity and the birds. So I ended up in seminary, and I think God has left my whole life. I ended up in seminary because I graduated from college. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had done semester missions to Taiwan. I spoke at Glorietta. I stepped off the stage, and Connie McNeil said, "Do you want to go to seminary? We'll give you a job and a scholarship." And my response was, "Okay." So when I was in seminary, y'all, and I'm just being transparent, but I was in seminary and people kept asking me, "Well, are you going to preach?" I'm like, "Why y'all keep asking me that?" Because I didn't know what seminary, I was getting a degree. So somewhere along the way, okay, I started being, I would pray. I felt so compelled to get the MDiv, but I would pray for the RE. And then, so soon as I got to, so I transferred to Southwestern because they had the communication, which was really me, and so I ended up doing a double degree to be quick. So then after the double degree, while we were at church and stuff, while I went to seminary, when I transferred to Texas, that first month, we had psychology of adult education. And the question was, what was the conversation you've been having? And for those of you who are young enough to remember the typewriter, I was literally typing my answer, and I typed without my permission, "women in ministry." And the next question was why? Because I feel called to ministry and I don't know what to do. And it threw me into trauma. I cried and cried and cried, got back to Kansas City the night before my church had that meeting that I mentioned. And so I was always one of the ones who God just did things like that. So when it was time to be ordained, I was graduating for the first time in 87, not 88, with my 2 masters. I had graduated, they came that night, and we had Presbyterian ministers. We had a little bit of everybody there. And so what I realize now is what my ordination did was granted me a passport to places that my name and my face and my background never would have gotten me in. And so now I hold on to it. Southern Baptist, National Baptist, I was saying earlier, neither one really wants me, but I'm their daughter, I'm their child, and I have the birth certificate. So that ordination sealed it for me. And I grew into it. It was just a process at the time.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to affirm that the stories that you're sharing about your ordination are the ones that we hear so often still for women, the struggle of accepting the validation of community, the struggle to find a space to minister, the struggle to know when and whether and how to accept this call and this title of reverend that we then carry around with our bodies and all that entails. So with that said, I want you to think a bit about this title of reverend that you have, that is a part of your identity. How, in your context, does it open doors? Is it a passport? And how does it maybe keep you out of spaces? Which is to say, in your own context, is women's ordination a settled issue, or is it something that's an ongoing conversation for women?
It's an ongoing conversation, and it's been a passport, and my visa has been denied on several fronts. But the thing is, though, I don't fret. I've had to preach from the floor after they invited me, and I try to always ask now if I'm invited, even now, if I'm invited, does your pastor know? Does your pastor know I'm ordained? I've been disinvited. In fact, I've been disinvited from a black church to do Black History Moment. Okay, so but you cannot fret that. That's not an issue, because even when you look biblically at every single call, when God called someone, God also called someone else to hear it. So you go where you're invited, or you go where God kicked the door down, and conversions happened when I had to preach from the floor. Okay, so both.
Well, when Mandy sent this question, I've struggled with it because I don't know what my context is anymore. I have multiple contexts. I grew up Southern Baptist. I've been affiliated with Cooperative Baptist Fellowship since its beginning. I now serve as president of an historically American Baptist seminary. I have been a member of a black church both in Snellville, Georgia, and now in Kansas City, Missouri for the last 13 years. So I don't know where my context is. But the other piece of this, and this goes back to something that you said, Alicia, Central Seminary is 70% Asian students. In our midst, we have many Korean students, as well as many students from Myanmar. And I look at our Korean women students who are seeking a place to belong and to be ordained, and many of them are shut out from that. One of our recent graduates, Joy Choi, went back to Seoul and started the Welcoming Church of Seoul. And she says it's an American Baptist church in South Korea, which I think is a beautiful thing. In Myanmar, the different tribal groups, ethnic groups, have different takes on ordination. We have some, the Kachin are very much opposed to women's ordination, so the women are fighting for their opportunity to serve and to be recognized. So my context is very diverse, and I would say it's still, for our sisters around the world, it's still hard for many of them to be recognized, to have opportunities, and to receive theological education. So we've got lots and lots of work to do.
I would also agree with Dr. Durst because I don't know which background you're referring to in my case.
You're all of those.
all of the above. All of the above. So I have to confess that when they invite me to speak or to preach, and they ask for my history, I have 2 different documents. And I have to think, okay, which group am I going to? One document says that I'm ordained pastor, the other doesn't. So in order for me to be able to do what I want to do without offending, I choose which one of the documents I'm going to be sending. So my backgrounds are different, and that affects the situation regarding my calling as reverend or as pastor. In South America, we are pastors more than reverends.
Well, I would love to say that it's a settled issue for us as American Baptists, but we're also on the journey. And what I would say about American Baptists is so, and the reason I would be able to, other than the obvious reason of saying that it's a settled issue, is that many of our American Baptist churches that are duly aligned often will encourage women to go through the American Baptist Church's regional process for ordination, because that usually goes smoother than for the other denominational affiliation. That being said, even for American Baptists, for women, I was going to say always, I would say almost always takes longer for women through the ordination journey, and it's almost always more arduous, more requirements that some people didn't even knew actually existed or were kind of passed over for others are suddenly highlighted and become a barrier, and so it just becomes more difficult. One colleague of mine in ministry had said that when she was going through her counsel, the executive minister at that time had said, "Over my dead body will you be ordained?" She's ordained now, he's dead. That is true, by the way.
I'm not sure quite how to transition from that, but I shall try. I want us to take a moment to celebrate a bit as well. And so I want you to consider what perhaps is one of your greatest joys in ministry. What has it been your joy to participate in with God on this journey of ministry? Doesn't have to be your favorite, just pick one.
They voted for me to be first. There are many, but thinking on one, for me, the greatest joy is to see how a Latina opens her eyes when she's confronted with the Bible, and she sees for the first time that God may be calling her to minister, and to see and to be able to share with them, like we have been doing with some people here through CLLI. For 3 years, we work with those ladies, and to see the change, to hear the testimonies, how they were able to just think that maybe, and then they decide to take the steps to obey and to be able to enjoy the thing that she has been keeping herself for such a long time. That for me is one of the greatest blessings. Once my husband and I had to kidnap a girl. We were serving at a church as a seminary students, and she had been talking with us a lot of times that she felt that God was calling her, and it was in Argentina. But their family didn't want to. And finally, there was a Sunday, we agreed with her to take her stuff, to take her suitcase to church. And when church was finished, she came to our car and we took her to seminary. We literally kidnapped her. Her family was there at the church, but they didn't know what she was doing. Now she's a pastor's wife. She's preaching, she's teaching, she's writing. See those changes. That's, for me, is one of the most amazing things and my joy.
I think when I think about joy in my life, and I look out in this room, there are so many of you who bring joy to me, that I got to journey with you in your callings and in your ministries and sit with you and discern and encourage and sometimes push you into places you didn't want to go. That's what has given me joy in my life, and it has been a grand delight to be in this space, to see you and to hug you and to be with you. And I am thankful for that joy that God has gifted me with. Come on, Carolyn, get some joy.
It's okay if you don't want to share.
No, that's not it. When you asked, I said, first of all, my dog. And you know, that's just right. And that's not the most spiritual answer, even though his name is Eli, right? So part of my journey was I had to give a presentation on the imagination of God, which God is just so funny, right? Because I just gave a little presentation and it changed my life, you know. And it's nothing like a presentation or a sermon that rises up and bites you in places. But what it invited me to do was to surrender my life in a new way to God. And as I reflected on my own life, I said, you know what, God, you've done pretty good. So what I want to do is live out your creative best in my life. And to sit back now with popcorn and watch God work it out. Now, before you pray that, I caution you, it won't go like you think. Okay? I went from California to Mississippi, from watching parrots to our new state bird, the mosquito. But what God did was introduce me to the triune God all over again, that I can just laugh and say, okay, so I need to watch you get me out of this situation. And that is the ultimate for me, you know, just watching God work, getting to sit, and the thing I give thanks for a lot with my sisters and my brothers is that, God, thank you for letting me get a front row seat of how you're working it out in their lives. And so I get giddy when I see God working it out, even when they don't see it. And then when they see it, you see the light in the eye. It's euphoric. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm so glad you said joys, but I'll keep it short. So it is a joy to be here, and I really want to say, and as American Baptist woman in ministry, I was going to be here no matter what. Meredith had come to the celebration, the 40th celebration of American Baptist women last summer, which we had, and Reverend Dr. Zena Jacques was our closer too. She's amazing. Don't miss the last service. And even having decided to come, I was thankful for the invitation to be part of what we are doing as Baptist sisters in ministry. And so I want to also say in terms of joy, where I live in Reston, Virginia, which is outside the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. And my Tricia Miller Manarin, and she was called as executive minister in 2020 after, in her own journey and her own story, let's just say, and a longer route. It takes women longer to move into different calls. But it's such a joy that she was called. And actually, and I'll just say, Reverend Patty Billieu is also, where's Patty? I don't see, oh yes, great. Actually, if you could, you're two of my joys. If both of you could stand, because they're both executive ministers. And one of the joys for me, one of the joys for me in American Baptist is the growing number of American Baptist women who are serving as executive ministers. Those are spaces that we still need to grow into, but there are now 8 of 33 regions who have women executive ministers, and it actually has been higher. Sadly, some have decided to retire: Yvonne Carter, Joan Friesen, Susie Ford. We have executive women who are retiring, which is wonderful. Actually, let me just say too, in terms of my joy, Reverend Jamina Apollinaris was the second overall woman who was called to executive ministry in 1989, and she served for 10 years, and that was really great. And I'll just end with this piece in terms of joy, is that after the jarring my first call process of not going forward because of the church not yet being ready for women, I was called to a church. And serving in that church, I connected with a group of women in the area. We would meet weekly for support and for study and sharing resources. At that time, we would bring our kids, and they would kind of play in the background. I had a couple of daughters at that time. Later, 2 sons came along. But one time, the church that I was serving was hosting a community Lenten service, and the neighboring pastor was going to be preaching. So as he came in, and he happened to be Lutheran, he had his whole Lutheran liturgical regalia on, which is very different, as we all know, from Baptist liturgical robes. And so my then 5-year-old was with me, and she looks, and so he was coming to our church. I don't think she'd ever been to the Lutheran church, so she's looking up at it, and the bells and the whistles and the whole thing, and I'm thinking, oh, she's amazed because I don't wear that kind, I don't really wear that kind of liturgical wear, and so then she turns to me and she says, "Mom, you mean men can be ministers too?" And that is. So for me, I mean, that kind of connects with the ordination in terms of being seen, having gifts validated, not gender be a barrier. And so what she saw was these women who would gather week after week. And so for her, the unusual. So, I'm not looking to take over the landscape, but I certainly want a landscape where women are appreciated and seen in that role. And that's a joy for me as I'm trying to. I know.
No, thank you all so much. On the flip side of that, what perhaps unique challenges or roadblocks have you experienced along the way? And because I know all of you continue to mentor women in ministry, what are you seeing in the women that you work with? What challenges and obstacles are they facing to ordained ministry and to ministry in Baptist life?
One of the challenges is the fact that we are different from what they are going through, and their ministry will be different. So the hard part is to mentor them so that they can find their own voice and own way and not try to create a model or a replica of who we are. But on the other side, try to guide them through the process that because there are some things that you might experience, and we can walk you through it, but sometimes that's all we can do. We can't protect you from it, and we sometimes don't have the wisdom to tell you how to maneuver it. And so they have us and they're still alone. We got a pandemic group coming through. That's a whole different story on the other side. And technology.
When I tell my story about calling, I felt called at 12, and when I got to Baylor, I realized that I was being called to teach. I wanted to be a professor like Dr. Lester, who taught my New Testament class. And so I did all the right things. I got a Master of Divinity. I came back to Baylor. I got a PhD in church history. 1992, and I was ready. And I sent out resumes everywhere. And the Southern Baptist colleges and universities and seminaries did not want me because I was a woman. And the Presbyterians and the Methodists and Episcopalians didn't want me because I was a Baptist. And the secular schools wouldn't even talk to me.
Because you were.
Because I was alive, I guess. Thank you, Carolyn. And so from 1992 until 1999, I waited. I waited to find a teaching position 7 years. And in the midst of that, I did other things, including for 4 years, I owned a housekeeping service. I cleaned people's houses for a living to make money, because that's what we do as women. We find a way to make it get done. And so to help support my family, that's what I did. But I will tell you, and I tell this story sometimes to students, it's where I learned ministry, was cleaning people's houses. Because most of my clients were older. They were there. I would scrub their toilet. wash my hands, of course, and go sit at the kitchen table with them and drink coffee with them. And they would tell me stories. They were lonely. They needed to be heard. And I would sit with them and cry with them and pray with them and sometimes attend their funerals. And that's where I learned ministry, in the in-between time. And sometimes I think we forget that about when we look at women who are seasoned as we are. We forget some of the hard stories and the long, long waiting that each of us had to do to be able to serve God. But I would give nothing for those years of scrubbing toilets.
Can I add? The other thing that you all, the world that is before us is not the world that we were trained for theologically. The new improved group, you're going to have to deal with stuff that's not even in the Bible. When we talk about transgendering, when we talk about the fact that weed is now legalized, and now, so instead of smoking sections, you got weed sections in your churches. When we talk about gender issues, and now that we have become and are becoming so more gender neutral, we don't deal well yet with our disabled. And so there is so much more ministry that needs to happen. And some of it is just going to be on the shoulders of those who come behind us to try to figure it out and preach that sermon and still be that minister.
My challenge would be something that my friend just said a little while ago. First of all, technology. Anita knows about that because I have some mentors that I use them as a resource with technology. And that relates to the broader picture of having been trained on many years ago and how to do ministry, and how much the world changed, our culture changed, our way to seeing things changed, that I'm behind, and I need to be updated to new things, and how to reach, how to be used by God in ways that I've never thought, that I'm not prepared to. So for me, that's my challenge, that I'm behind, I'm getting behind, and I need to be updated in so many things.
A lot. I think for me, kind of going back to what Dr. Durso had opened us with in terms of belonging, I think for me, I'm still on a journey to fully embrace my own space and who I am, because the models for ministry out there don't always include who we are as women. And, you know, there's many of my colleagues who started in ministry earlier, you know, there's a very male motto, and the expectations in terms of how you dress, how you sound, how you look, were very rigid. And so, you know, back in those days, women would often wear very short cropped hair and very male, you know, kind of business sort of suits and all of that. And being able to grow and blossom and journey and being able to be who we are and to use our own voice. I was struck, we were talking, Dr. Gordon, earlier when we came in this morning, and I was really impacted. She had said that she really loves where she is right now because she's able to use all of the gifts that she has been given. Well, not all of them, but more than maybe being in the previous position. And so for me, I'm still really, the challenge is owning and embracing that voice in a context when the voices of women still aren't always heard and we're not always seen for who we are. So I think that would be.
Thank you so much. One final question. What we've been seeking to celebrate this couple of days, and also to issue challenge for the way forward. So what perspective do you feel like we have not heard from yet during this event? And what might their stories add to our conversation? Whose voice is not here, and what might that challenge us to do, or what might it add to the conversation?
So I would say that Carolyn and I both had the same thought about Asian American women. Asian women are not here in our space. And I would say American Baptist Churches USA does amazing work with some of its caucuses, including the Asian caucus. And there are so many women we need to know in ABC circles who are inspiring and doing great work. And so they're not here.
Other voices that are missing or that are being left out that we might learn from.
Again, the disabled. Again, we've got to figure out a way of how we don't make people who are not like us feel as though they are not complete or whole, and that their voices don't matter. And there is an entire disabled community that I think we need to be more intentional about reaching as well.
Thank you.
My first thought was Asian people. Then I thought on people with disabilities. And then I remember what Anita said a little while ago about the newcomers here to the States. How can we reach them? How can we reach the migrant people? What can we do for them in order to consider them as persons, brothers, sisters, and help them getting settled in this new environment? What can we do to make our voices heard regarding ways to helping her, to consider them as human beings? What can we do about them?
I really echo all of that, the Asian and immigrant and different people, those who are ably challenged. I think having spaces that are accessible for all, thinking about hearing challenges is a growing issue. I guess the only thing that I would, well, and actually, and talking about ageism too, because the other thing for women is that women, for a variety of reasons, barriers that are out there, also self-doubt and not being seen or heard or valued, women's journey into ministry is often longer. And so by the time that women are going to seminary, I was traveling to an event just in the last couple of weeks and was on the phone talking with a woman who was just graduating from seminary and also nearing retirement, and asking about what opportunities there are. And we need to know that. So women's journeys often take longer, and for a variety of reasons, they often respond later and longer. So not at the same time, while we are working to have spaces for younger women, also not marginalizing those who are coming into ministry at later ages. And the only other group that I would mention would be not necessarily in, well, I think what has been affirmed in terms of having this space for women who are serving in ministry is really important. And also, we need to acknowledge that the strongest resistance to women being called into pastoral positions is lay women. So it's a double-edged sword, because women, the Women's Missionary Union, auxiliary women in American Baptist churches were often the first who were very strong voices, very strong advocates for women moving into positions. And also, as women have moved into those spaces, there's been a rising resistance in terms of some women and lay women feeling that they've lost their place and position, and that's a very unique challenge and voice to hear more of and to explore in terms of how we can support each other on this journey and not be at odds with each other.
Another group that just came to my mind is the girls in their late teenage years. Girls that are thinking about their careers their future. They need to know when they are choosing their careers, they need to know that God has a place for them. And they may be wonderful Christians serving through any other profession, but they need to know there's one profession that's still there, that is there and is available for them. So that would be another group that we could focus on them.
So I think Baptist Women in Ministry in this space has been very welcoming of queer women, but I need to say that their voices are often not heard from the pulpit in these places. And just to name that and get some snaps, thank you very much. Now you can't stop us.
Okay, because I'm going to backtrack and say differently abled. But also, this is a challenge. Whoever you don't want in this room, that's who need to be here.
I thank you all for sharing from your stories and your experience as a woman in ministry. Did you have something? From your experience as women in ministry, I want to encourage all of you to claim your own story as a woman in ministry, as a supporter of women in ministry, and to share that story with other people. Our panelists today have reminded us of the importance of mentoring younger women. They have reminded us of the importance of calling out the gifts that we see in other people. They have reminded us of the importance of walking alongside them and making space for them and getting them into seminary, even if they don't know what they're going to do with that degree. This is important work, and we need to be involved in this advocacy together. And then, of course, to continue to celebrate the gifts of the women in our midst and to walk with them through the ups and downs, the joys and the struggles that are part of any kind of ministry for everyone who is called to this task. So if you will, please join me in thanking our panelists.
We are grateful to our panel for sharing with us. I just have a few announcements as we head into the afternoon. As a reminder, you are on your own for lunch. There are some places near here and there are some places far from here, and I am convinced you will find them. That's right. After lunch, as we have talked about, there are options of things that you can participate in. There are still open slots for massages and for coaching. And so if that is something you are interested in, and even if it's not, if you will go down the hallway and sign up for a massage, we've got 2 folks coming in, and I know that they would love to fill all of the time slots. There are also sign-ups for coffee and conversation at Heine Brothers and wine and conversation with folks at Mesh, and so check that out. The Family Life Center will be open all afternoon. There's a walking track at the top of the gym if you wanted to do that. There's pickleball courts if you'd like to play, and just space to gather as well as visiting with the authors, visiting exhibitors. There's BWIM swag available for suggested donations. There's the history table with the folios as well as some other items. And there are also the thank you notes. Before you leave, please do not forget to write a thank you note. Write one to a foremother, write one to a mentor, write one to someone in this place who has been influential to you. Being a part of this community means acknowledging one another and saying that. And so there are lots of thank you notes in there for you to write. And then we just have the few scheduled options. At 1:30, we will have our Meet the Foremothers time in the Family Life Center. This is just a come and go, ask for stories, visit, and we will be there, and we'll come and have snacks and have a good time. 2:30 is the Sisters of Solidarity, and this is for Baptist women of color to get together and have conversation, and they will be in the Women of Grace room, which if you don't know where that is, we will show you where it is. And then at 3:30, if you are a woman who is still figuring out how to navigate in your congregation all that is going on with the SBC, we want there to be a space for you to share stories with one another and for us to give you anything that we have in terms of knowledge about that. And of course, you can also just rest. Part of that rest, there's a prayer garden, I've been told, this way on the church property, if you wanted to utilize that as well. We will be back in Friendship Hall at 6:30 for the banquet. We're going to open up the serving lines at 6:15, so if you want to come early and help get the flow of traffic, we'll be happy to have you early for that. We'll also be honoring our distinguished mentor in our Church of Excellence at the banquet, in addition to our foremothers, so we're looking forward to having you there for that meal. Have a good afternoon. Go in peace.